Are you doing it or am I doing it? Who doing it? You do it?
I'll do
it. Okay. Okay.
Welcome, everybody, to Ignite Agility. I'm here today with Rand Eaton.
Hello, everyone.
And we are going to talk about a few things dealing with Kanban and Scrum.
Cool.
What were your thoughts, Rand? You had given me an idea this morning, and I think you should run with it.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, first of all, if you like content like this, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button because that helps us out. And hit the little bell icon and all that stuff. If you know how YouTube works, you know what to do with all that stuff. So just go ahead and do that. But what I wanted to talk to Christian about was the if you read a lot of things on the internet about Kanban and Scrum, there's this idea that they don't work together, right? Kanban versus Scrum or something like that. And they really do. They work together really well. But one of the things I wanted to kind of pick Christian's brain about, because he's a CST person, so he knows all about the Scrummy stuff, is the different perception of work between Kanban and Scrum. So when we say, the way that we look at work different, what is that? How does Scrum look at work, Christian?
Scrum looks at work through the lens of a team.
Okay.
I don't know when I heard this, but I've been working in Scrum for a while, and it was just one of those memories where you're like, man, what else am I not looking at this through the right lens with? But it's all about teams.
Yeah.
No one person runs your company. Unless you're a solo enterprise.
Solopreneur, right?
Right. But once you get more than one person, you're a team. And so then it becomes, how do we get a framework in place? That's really what the framework was. How do you build teams that can quickly and consistently deliver value?
Yep. And the Scrum Guide says something like 3 to 9. It changes every year.
Well, it's new now. They have 10 or fewer. It's
10 or fewer.
They used to say 3 plus or 6 plus or minus 3 for the people who are developing the product. Now the Scrum Guide, as of November 2020, says 10 or fewer.
Yeah. So there is actually direction in the Scrum Guide about how the team is made up. It's all the skills necessary to deliver the increment. It's less than 10 people. It needs to blah, blah, blah. Kanban doesn't have any of that.
No.
Kanban basically just says, we want to focus on the work and let the people organize to get it done. And that's one thing that's surprising to some people is how different that actually makes things. Because Scrum, like you said, is how does this team pull together to get the increment done by the end of it? And there's a whole process there, right? There's a sprint
roles,
guide. And
there's responsibility. Well, there's not roles and responsibilities. There's roles. So
right.
You have to stand up the roles, right? So you have to identify. We don't necessarily have to hire people. It's identify.
Right.
But that's where, if you're new to the game, they think you got to go hire somebody, they be new to the game. But you don't. And it's been reinforced that the best people to fill these roles are already working at your company.
Right.
However, it's that change.
Sure.
And then it's understanding the role. And there's artifacts that some of these roles own. There's Scrum Master owns no artifacts.
Right.
They own the process. So there's a lot of rigor compared to, say, Kanban or, a lean practice. So in those things that adhere to Agile, different types of approaches, different mechanics. Comparing those relative, Scrum is probably has the most rigor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And so Kanban comes along and just says, no, we're concentrating on the work from the customer's perspective. So that's another not change, but sort of distinction, right? I mean,
right.
Kanban doesn't say how to set up a board or how to set up a system. It just says you need to set it up like this. This table is bumping. And beyond that, no, it's hitting the wall. It's touching the wall. So relative to that, though, however you organize is up to you. And it's often said that there's sort of 3 agendas of Kanban. There's the team agenda, which is if you have like a Scrum team, 10 or less people or what have you. That's really more about survival. So usually teams are overburdened and they're drinking from the fire hose. So what do we do about that? How do we handle that? Then there's another layer called the services agenda. And now what we're starting to look at is anything that our organization does, we can start to think about that as a service that we deliver. And so, if you're a commodities company, or if you're a software company, whatever it is that you do, you're still providing a service. And so what are the things in that agenda that are different? And that's where we start to take our first steps into systems thinking, right? Which is something you and I have talked a lot about, where now it's about end to end. And one of the things that's often said about Scrum is, it has this very good team focus, but what happens before the team and what happens after the team and things like that. So
as you were just talking, going from team focus versus system, that's the product conversation you have to start with. What's our product, or what are our products? And those could be a service, and then you back from that into a team.
Yep.
Whereas and that's Kanban starting with, you could start with team.
Yep.
You could start with, and you've even said it, start where you're at, which in reality, if you really want to do good Scrum, you should get a baseline pre-Scrum of how things are going so that you can at least use Scrum as an experiment to see if Scrum improved the things that you're trying to get better at.
And that's what I was going to say. These things are all there in the Scrum framework. It just doesn't they're not called out a lot. And so that's why I think some organizations get a lot of lift out of Scrum and other organizations don't, is the ones that use that framework as an opportunity to say, well, what are we doing and what aren't we doing, right? And Kanban has, just by virtue of focusing your attention, you get to some of those decisions faster, I think, which is interesting. And then the third agenda level is the organization. So now what if you have the entire organization that's running according to these systems and things? And so now you've got, instead of a collection of teams, it's the entire organization is looking at this end to end. Are we consistently delivering? What are the services we're consistently delivering on? How are the teams structured so that they're delivering those services? And now you're dealing with all three of those kind of levels at the same time. So there's a lot of overlap in there in terms of misunderstanding potentially. And what I mean by that is if you come into this stuff from a Scrum perspective and then you look at Kanban, your head as often as not in that same sort of horizon. Yeah. Versus like, okay, well, what do we do, right? And so we'll hear this all the time talking to people about Scrum. It's like, okay, well, that's great, but what about this in Scrum? And what about that in Scrum? And it doesn't say, right? It says make a team, motivated individuals, give them the support, all that stuff. But then, okay, how do they consistently get better, right? And I like the way you put it. There's a product conversation that needs to happen. And so what is our product? What is our service? Right?
And then you also see if it's not a product, you can use it to do product development, it being Scrum, but you can also use it as work management, right? And, you talk about budgeting and planning, there's capacity planning, meaning, we just, like you said, we're drinking from the fire hose. I was just reading an article this morning about how, you got to have slack in the system. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to respond because you're book's solid, right? So if something comes up, you have to queue it versus being able to respond to it. Now, granted, there's some things you respond to because of different service level agreements, a term from Kanban, but same thing from Scrum. It's, well, this is a 5-alarm fire. We're not going to put them on the backlog. We're going to jump on it. But then there's other things that if you had slack, you might be able to squeeze in. Not even squeeze. You'd be able to address. Squeeze is the wrong term.
Yeah, and I don't know where I heard it first, but I've always sort of thought and taught that once a Scrum team gets to about 75% capacity of its work, that's where you should really start going, do we really want to bring in any more, or are we okay? Because, especially now with the most recent Scrum Guide, remember, you're trying to achieve the sprint goal. It's not really about what stories get done or don't get done or anything. It's are we achieving the sprint goal? And so if we do go all the way up to 100% capacity inside the sprint, now, we are locked. We are committed. There's no ability to pull more stuff in because we're at that level, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I think organizations getting more comfortable with this sort of feeling of we're not worried about being busy, right? We're worried about delivering value. And if we're delivering value, then that's the goal, right? Right out of the Agile Manifesto.
And busy was easy to do.
Yeah. Just walk around and is everybody's head down over the console or whatever.
Yeah, and then when people demand outcome, well, I'm working.
Right.
When's it going to happen, right? And if there's multiple priorities, you can easily say, well, this one took precedent, that one needed me, that one needed me. It's easy to be busy. It's hard to be productive.
Yep.
And, been saying this a lot lately when people ask me, but, do your customers care if you're Kanban or Scrum or project management? They don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Our customers do not care how we work. So do we have a way to assess ourselves in a way that we agree with it? Like, okay, yeah, we do need to get better here. This isn't working. This is what we look at. Do we have a good way of figuring out where we're at?
Mm-hmm.
And if we aren't where we want to be, do we then have a good way of trying different things, time boxed, to see if we are?
Right.
That's the hard part. That's the culture. That's the system thinking. Like, how well versed are we at reading ourselves and our own systems?
Sure.
And do we argue over the data, or do we actually say, no, if these things are happening, we agree? And then it becomes, how good are we at floating ideas or getting ideas to try different things?
Well, in in Scrum, there's the product review, or the sprint reviews. Sorry, and
get it right.
I know. Well, and how often do we have actual customers at that thing, right? It's like if the intent is to gather feedback from actual stakeholders and customers, but it's just the product owner and the team looking at each other like, well, what did we get done? I mean, that's, are we validating the assumptions that we've made? Are we taking the right? And again, Kanban doesn't say explicitly to do this, but most Kanban teams will have some sort of replenishment meeting or feedback session or something like that.
That's their term.
Are we
feedback loops?
Yeah. Are we delivering the thing that we're supposed to be delivering?
So it's not explicit, but it's in there. If you're going to get feedback loops to make sure you're building the right thing, and are you building it right, you probably need to talk to your customer. So then people say, well, who's your customer? Who's your stakeholder? Well, again, you have to make sure the terms you're using are understood where you're at. And so it's like, well, we view the people who also pay for this but maybe don't use this the same as the people who use it. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they're both. They're the same. But that's what you want.
Right. We've worked with a lot of insurance companies over the years, and that conversation around who the customer is gets muddled really fast, right? Is it the person that's buying the policy? Is it the person that's redeeming the policy? Is it the person that's selling the policy? I mean, it just, you can go down a rabbit hole really quick. So thinking and validating who our customer actually is, again, is a big piece of this, because in both Scrum and Kanban, you want to make sure that the customer is part of this discussion. And that's, I think, another, not new, but we're inviting customers into some of these conversations. Did you like what we made? No. Well, how could we do it better? Or what's the timing on that kind of stuff? So I think it's just funny, and this is where I started this whole discussion, was it's funny how Scrum focuses on the team makeup and then leaves a lot of this other organizational stuff to be discovered, if you will. And Kanban focuses on more the organizational side of it, of
the system.
We're not worried about who the people are. We know they're going to get it done, but where is the work? How is the work progressing according? It's an interesting perception of why one framework starts one way and one system starts another way. So,
absolutely.
Any other thoughts on that? I mean, we've talked a lot about systems thinking and internally here for a bit, but anything to add? Or?
I'm trying to remember something that's not coming to me. So,
all right. Well, we'll get it on the next video. How about that?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
It was in a class, and they were doing something with story map.